A restless young woman named Elara once found a map washed up by the sea. It was not an ordinary map, but a star chart carved into a piece of driftwood, its lines glowing faintly under the moon. This single discovery would draw her away from her quiet coastal village and toward the greatest legend of all, the fabled Lost Continent of Starstone. She believed this ancient guide was the key, a celestial path to a place many called a myth. To follow it, she would have to risk everything, her standing, her security, and her place in the world she knew, all for a dream that most considered a fool's errand. The ocean itself seemed to whisper, its voice a mix of caution and invitation. By the end of this journey, you will discover a profound truth about where real magic is found. What forgotten shores might lie just beyond the edge of our own maps, and what would you risk to find them? I would love to know where you are listening from right now, and what the local time is for you as we settle into this story together. What is a dream you once held on to against all odds? The polished brass of her family's spyglass felt warm in her hand for the final time. Alara traded it for a place on the Moon Chaser, a small ship whose sails were patched with stories of distant storms. With that exchange, her last tangible link to the shore was gone. A wave of liberation washed over her, so potent it was swiftly followed by a deep, aching sense of change. Her future now rested with a skeptical captain and his crew, men who saw her quest not as a noble pursuit, but as a youthful dream. Their laughter was a constant, sharp-edged sound against the creak of the ship, their words dismissing her star-charted driftwood as a hopeful treasure map. She learned to build a fortress of quiet within herself, retreating behind its walls each night to stand alone at the railing. Under a canopy of unfamiliar stars, her fingers would trace the glowing lines on the wood, the constellations her only faithful companions. The crew's mockery soon shifted into a different kind of disquiet as the sea around them changed. The waters grew still and heavy, and a thick, pearlescent mist began to coil around the masts, softening the familiar sounds of the ocean. Compasses spun lazily, their needles without purpose. The men fell into a nervous quiet, their superstitious whispers carrying further than their jibes ever had. The horizon ahead was no longer a clean line between sea and sky, but a place where the very air seemed to shift, shimmering with a soft, unusual light that promised neither dawn nor dusk, but something entirely new. The world dissolved into a featureless silver. The pearlescent mist closed around the Moon Chaser like a gentle hand, swallowing the masts and softening the sea itself. Every sound was absorbed into that thick haze, the creak of the ship, and the men's voices becoming dull and muted, as if they were all standing inside a vast, quiet room. The compass needle spun in a frantic, useless circle, confirming their fears. They were completely lost. The crew's initial nervousness turned into a sharp and tangible worry, and that worry quickly found its focus in Alara. Their murmurs were no longer whispers, but open questions, wondering if her hopeful map had led them into this strange, silent expanse. The captain, his face a mask of grim practicality, confronted her at the ship's bow. "We are turning back," he stated, his voice flat and final. "This is not a quest, it is a risk I cannot take. I will not lose my ship for a hopeful dream." In that moment, with the hopes of a lifetime fading around her, Alara's desperation forged a difficult bargain. she met the captain's stern gaze and spoke of the starlight gems, the legendary treasures said to grace the pathways of Starstone. She promised him a share, a fortune beyond measure, if he would only press on for one more day. Her heart sank even as she spoke, for now her pure quest was tied to a material promise, her integrity offered for a single chance. The captain's eyes narrowed, weighing the risk against the possible reward. He gave a single, sharp nod. One day, he growled. The feeling on the deck tightened like a wire. And then, from the deep, silent waters beneath the hull, a low, melodic humming began to rise, a vibration that seemed to travel up through the very planks of the ship. The humming swelled into a chorus of impossible beauty, voices weaving through the fog like silken threads. They did not sing words, but pure longing, plucking the deepest desires from each person's heart. One sailor, who dreamed of a quiet farm, reached for the green fields he saw shimmering in the mist. Another, yearning for a lost love, called out a name and moved toward the railing with a vacant smile. The ship was drifting into a waking dream, its crew enchanted by the promise of everything they had ever wanted. Alara felt the pull herself, a dizzying image of Starstone's spires flashing in her mind, but her studies screamed a warning through the enchantment. This was the Siren song, not of monsters, but of mirrors, reflecting a person's own heart back at them until they walked willingly into the deep. Her eyes darted across the deck, finding the small, tarnished ship's bell. She lunged for it, grabbing the rope and pulling with all her strength. A single, harsh, clanging note erupted, a sound of pure reality that shattered the delicate melody. The beautiful voices faltered and vanished, as if a spell had been broken. The entranced crew members blinked, stumbling back from the rail as the visions of farms and lost loves dissolved into the cold, gray mist. They were safe, but the air was now thick with a new kind of unease. They looked at Alara, not with mockery, but with a shaken gratitude that quickly turned to apprehension. Her map had not just led them into strange weather, but into the path of legends that could cloud a person's mind. Their alliance with her was now fragile, built on a foundation of shared caution rather than shared purpose. Seeing the concern in their eyes, Elara made a decision. "I will take the watch," she announced, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "All of you, get some rest. I will ring the bell if anything changes." This act, a quiet offering of protection, was her first true step as their guide, a proof of courage that went beyond bargaining for time. The encounter had irrevocably changed their journey. It was no longer a simple voyage toward a fabled shore, but a passage through the very stories that guarded it. The stakes were no longer about finding treasure, but about returning home with their spirits and lives intact. As the long night finally began to fade, the pearlescent mist thinned, drawn back like a curtain. And there, under the soft light of a dawn they had barely hoped to see, a coastline emerged. It was not of sand or stone, but of what looked like solid, shimmering crystal, catching the first rays of the sun and scattering them into 1,000 points of brilliant, impossible light. The ship's hull scraped gently against a shore that was not sand, but a seamless expanse of polished crystal. Alara was the first to step from the boat, her boots meeting the ground with a soft, musical note. With every gentle wash of the turquoise waves, the entire coastline answered in a delicate, chiming chorus, a symphony played by the sea itself. The crew followed, their earlier apprehension giving way to a quiet wonder as they walked upon the singing beach. Their footsteps added new, hesitant notes to the ongoing melody, and for a moment, the sheer beauty of the place felt like a welcome. Yet the longer they stood there, the more the music of the crystals began to change. The random, wave-borne chiming coalesced into distinct, repeating patterns, the notes growing louder and weaving together into something that felt less like a song and more like a language. It was beautiful, but there was an undeniable tension in its complexity, a question they could not answer. Was it a greeting or a boundary being declared? Elara closed her eyes, listening not just with her ears, but with her entire being. She remembered the star chart's guidance, and she understood that this was the next part of the map. While the crew began to fan out, drawn by the glittering prospect of gems, she turned her attention inland. A specific path of crystals, leading away from the shore, began to pulse with a brighter, internal light. Its chime, a clear, insistent melody against the backdrop of the ocean's rhythm. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that this was the way. Trusting the living land to guide her, she chose to follow the path of light. With each step she took, the crystals ahead of her brightened in response, as if acknowledging her choice. The continent was not a passive place to be explored, but an active participant in their journey, deeply aware of their every move. The luminous trail led them away from the open shore and toward the edge of a forest, where the trees themselves glowed with a soft, internal radiance, their leaves shimmering in the shifting, silent air. The air within the forest was thick with the scent of petrichor and ozone. The trees were pillars of living light, their bark smooth and cool to the touch, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the land itself. And then the whispers began. It was not a sound carried on the wind, but one that bloomed directly inside the mind, a soft rustle of voices speaking in a language no one could understand, yet everyone felt they almost could. They were fragments of epic poems, whispered secrets of kings and queens, the final words of heroes from an age long turned to dust. For Alara, it was a library of lost lore, but for the crew, it was a labyrinth of their own making. The ancient tales began to twist, reflecting not history, but their own personal regrets. A sailor heard the whisper of a promise he had broken to his brother. Another heard the ghost of an angry word he had spoken to his child, now echoing back at him with accusing clarity. The forest held up a mirror to their souls, and the sight was unsettling. Paranoia began to coil through the group like a vine. They stopped speaking to one another, their eyes darting suspiciously as each man wrestled with the private sorrows the woods had unearthed. The tension broke when Rorick, a normally steadfast man, spun around, his face pale with a raw and sudden fear. He clutched his head, his voice cracking. "It is taking them," he cried out. "My memories are fading, slipping away into the soil. We have to go back. This place is a thief." He turned to the others, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. "Who will stand with me? We will take the longboat and leave this cursed rock." This was no longer simple fear. It was the spark of mutiny. Alara moved to stand before him, not with anger, but with a profound calm. She knew that reason would not reach a heart clouded by phantom regrets, so she did not argue. Instead, she shared a secret of her own. "I hear it too, Rorick," she said, her voice soft but clear enough for all to hear. I hear the day I left my mother without a proper goodbye, thinking I would see her again. That is a weight I carry every day. This forest does not steal our past. It shows it to us. It asks if we are defined by our regrets, or if we are strong enough to carry them and still move forward. Her confession hung in the luminous air, a bridge of shared vulnerability. Rorick stared at her, the frantic energy slowly draining from his posture. He was not alone in his pain. Her empathy was a balm, cooling the fever of his panic. The immediate threat of rebellion passed, but a deeper, more personal challenge had been laid bare. Each person now understood that the greatest obstacle on this continent was not the strange geography or its mythical guardians, but the landscape of their own hearts. They had to make peace with their shadows if they wished to see the light ahead. As this realization settled over the group, the chaotic whispers around them suddenly shifted, weaving together into a single, coherent stream of sound. The fragmented voices united, no longer speaking of the past, but giving a clear, directional command, their collective will pointing unmistakably toward the looming peak of a great, crystalline mountain in the distance. The path from the whispering forest led them directly to the base of Starfall Mountain, a colossal peak that pierced the sky like a shard of frozen light. Its slopes were not earth and stone, but a continuous, shimmering crystal that gleamed with an inner radiance, as if a million stars had been trapped within the rock. The air grew thin and cold as they began their ascent, each step a careful negotiation on the glassy, uneven surface. The crew, already weary from their trials, now faced a purely physical challenge that strained their muscles and tested their resolve. The mountain's unearthly light played tricks on their senses, causing the ground to shimmer and shift in their peripheral vision. One man swore he saw his own shadow detach and walk beside him, while another paused, convinced he heard his name called from a sheer drop. These were not the psychological echoes of the forest, but vivid hallucinations born from the sheer, disorienting energy of the place. Rorick, his nerves still frayed from the earlier encounter, moved with a tense, brittle caution. His focus was entirely inward, wrestling with the phantoms in his mind, when the rock beneath his boot gave way without warning. A sharp cry was torn from his lips as he slid downward, his hands scrambling for a hold that wasn't there. He came to a jarring halt, his body suspended over a deep chasm that echoed with a soft, crystalline hum. For a terrifying moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The crew stood frozen, their own fears reflected in the wide, helpless stare of their companion. It was Alara who broke the spell. "Move now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the thin air with a clarity that brooked no argument. She did not shout, but her tone held the weight of absolute necessity. She dropped to her knees, anchoring herself around a sturdy, protruding crystal spire. "Grab my ankles," she ordered the man behind her. "Form a chain." One by one, the crew shook off their stupor, locking hands and ankles in a human tether stretched taut over the abyss. The lowest sailor, a man named Kale, strained to reach Rorick's desperately flailing hand. Elara felt the immense pull on her body, the sharp edges of the crystal digging into her arms, but she held fast, her gaze fixed on the precarious link between Kale and Rorick. With a final, grunting heave from the entire line, Rorick was hauled back onto the solid path, collapsing in a trembling heap. The rescue had taken only moments, but it forged a new understanding among them. They had not just saved a man, they had reclaimed their unity. Alara's quick thinking and willingness to place herself at the point of greatest risk cemented her role as their unspoken leader, no longer the dreamer with a map, but the person they would follow. The mountain, however, was not finished with them. As they continued their climb, the path seemed to grow more treacherous in response, the crystal shifting subtly underfoot, as if testing their newfound trust. The summit finally leveled out before them, a windswept plateau of pure, smooth stone, and there, set into the mountain's very peak, was the entrance to a cavern. It was not a dark opening, but an archway that radiated a cool, steady, blue light, an invitation and a promise from the heart of the Lost Continent itself. The cavern breathed. Its walls were not rock, but a tapestry of colossal, crystalline hearts, each one pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light that filled the vast space with a living warmth. The air hummed with a low, resonant tone, the sound of deep and ancient slumber. All words died on the lips of the crew. Their exhaustion, their fear, even their awe, was swallowed by a profound and humbling reverence. They had not just found a treasure trove. They were standing in the very heart of the continent, a sanctuary of power that felt both immense and deeply peaceful. For a long moment, no one moved, held captive by the gentle, breathing light. Then, a shift in the silence. The captain's breath caught, not in wonder, but in recognition. His eyes, wide with a different kind of hunger, scanned the walls. He saw the legendary starlight gems, each one a fortune that could buy a fleet of ships, the tangible reward for his risk. The quiet bargain he had struck with Alara out on the misty sea now echoed in the sacred space, a stark contrast to the peace around them. His hand twitched at his side, the desire to claim his prize a physical tension in his posture. Elara felt the change in him as clearly as she felt the hum of the starstones. She did not look at the gems as prizes to be won. She saw them as beings to be honored. While the captain calculated wealth, she took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze fixed on the central stone, a magnificent pillar that anchored the entire chamber. She did not reach for a tool or a sack. Instead, she simply raised her bare hand and pressed her palm flat against its cool, smooth surface. It was not an act of taking, but of greeting. A quiet thank you to the land that had tested them, and a gesture of profound respect for the mystery they had found. The moment her skin met the crystal, the entire chamber flared. The dormant starstones awoke in a silent, unified symphony of light, their gentle pulses sharpening into a brilliant, coherent radiance that washed over the crew without heat. From the heart of that gathered light, directly before the central stone, a form began to coalesce. It was woven from the very essence of the starstones, a spectral guardian whose shape was humanoid yet fluid, like a figure seen through clear, moving water. It stood, tall and serene, and turned its gaze upon them. Its eyes held the patience of epochs, and in their depths, the entire history of this lost continent seemed to reside, waiting to see what these visitors would do next. The Guardian's voice was not a sound, but a resonance that filled the cavern and their minds at once. It wove a tapestry of images before their inner eyes, showing them Starstone not as a place, but as a living memory. They saw continents rising and falling, civilizations flourishing and fading, not into ruin, but into quiet slumber. They felt the gentle pull of the land as it gathered the fading echoes of dreams the wider world had forgotten, giving them a place to rest and hum with gentle, perpetual life. The crew was swept into this shared vision, and each saw their own life reflected in the continent's timeless heart. The captain saw the simple fishing boat of his youth, a dream traded long ago for a larger, more practical ship. Another sailor felt the ghost of a childhood wish to paint the sky. Their private hopes and quiet disappointments were no longer secrets, but part of a grand, melancholic symphony. The guardian's silent voice then shifted from showing to asking, its intent clear and unwavering. Only one who holds a dream above all treasure may pass beyond this point. The statement hung in the luminous air, a challenge that bypassed words and went straight to the soul. It forced every person to look inward and weigh the desires that had truly driven them here. All eyes turned to the captain. The internal struggle was plain on his face, a war between a lifetime of acquisition and the profound awe now blooming within him. He looked at the walls of priceless gems, then at his crew, and finally at Alara, who stood with a quiet certainty he now understood. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound a release of a heavy weight. "I renounce any claim," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The treasure I sought is dust compared to this. The experience of standing here, of remembering what it is to truly wonder, that is the only reward I need." His confession was a key, as the other crew members murmured their own quiet agreements. A collective decision settled over them. Their purpose had been purified. The guardian regarded them, its form flickering with what could only be approval. Without a sound, it gestured, and the solid wall of crystal behind it parted like a curtain of water, revealing a chamber they had not known was there. This new space glowed with a soft, inviting radiance, promising answers to the continent's final mystery. But the Guardian's warning echoed in their minds one last time, a final condition for passage. To enter, you must be willing to make a sacrifice. The nature of that offering, it implied, would be found within your own heart. The air in the final chamber was still and cool. Before her, floating just above a simple pedestal of the same living crystal, was a single, perfect starstone. It was small enough to fit in her palm, and it pulsed with a gentle light, humming a melody that seemed to contain all the music of the universe. This was the heart of the heart, the source she had journeyed so far to find. As she stepped closer, the chamber walls shimmered, and visions bloomed around her. She saw her coastal village, not as she left it, but transformed. A great statue of her stood in the square, her name on everyone's lips. A hero returned with proof of the impossible. The vision shifted, and she was surrounded by towering shelves of glowing books, every secret of Starstone laid bare for her to study and understand. Then came the simplest, most piercing image of all, her own small room, the familiar quilt on her bed, a warm fire in the hearth, and the profound, quiet safety of home. Each scene was a perfect echo of her deepest desires, tailored to tempt her soul. Her hand trembled as she reached for the floating stone, but as her fingers neared its radiant surface, she noticed the light in the chamber walls beginning to dim. The gentle hum of the starstones around her faltered, their rhythmic pulses growing faint. A terrible understanding washed over her. Taking this core stone would not be a discovery, it would be an extraction. It would fulfill her quest, grant her every wish, but it would drain the life from this sanctuary, plunging the entire continent back into its long, silent sleep. The magic would not be shared, it would be consumed, and the dream would end because of her. Her ambition warred with a newfound, deeper love for this living land. The pain of the choice was a physical ache, a tearing within her spirit. To come so far, to hold proof in her grasp, and to willingly let it go felt like a kind of ending. She saw the statue in the village square crumble to dust in her mind's eye. She saw the glowing books snap shut, their light extinguished forever. She felt the warmth of the hearth fire fade into cold memory. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, but her hand, which had hovered so close to glory, slowly fell back to her side. She would leave the Starstone where it floated. She would sacrifice her proof, her validation, and her personal dream, so that the greater dream of Starstone could live on. The moment her decision was made, the chamber did not fall dark. It erupted. A brilliant, pure white light flooded the space, so intense it was not blinding but clarifying, washing away the last shadows of her regret. The Guardian's voice filled her mind once more, its resonance now vibrant with joy. "You have chosen wonder over possession," it echoed. "In doing so, you have not ended the dream, you have completed it." The continent is awake, and as those words settled, a low, soft tremor ran through the mountain, a gentle shudder that was not of destruction, but of reawakening, as if a great heart had begun to beat again after 1,000 years of silence. The tremor was a gentle, rising vibration that grew into a profound hum, resonating from the very core of the mountain. It was not a sound of destruction, but of life returning. The entire cavern of starstones blazed with an incandescent light, each crystal heart beating in perfect, silent unison. The energy that flooded the chamber was a physical warmth, washing over the crew in a wave of pure vitality. Every ache from their long climb vanished. The lingering fatigue from their journey melted away, replaced by a deep and unshakable calm, as if they had just awoken from the most restful sleep of their lives. Their fears and regrets, so recently laid bare, were soothed into a quiet understanding. They were not just visitors anymore, they were part of the continent's reawakening. This profound peace was punctuated by a sharp, grinding crack from the cavern's entrance, a section of the crystalline archway, shaken loose by the continent's resurgence, sheared away and crashed down, sealing them inside with a thunderous echo. A cloud of fine, glittering dust filled the air, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, darkness threatened to return, but there was no panic. The captain's voice cut through the settling dust, clear and calm. "To the rubble," he commanded, and the crew moved as one. There were no questions, no arguments. Rorick and Kale, who had nearly come to blows in the forest of whispers, now strained shoulder to shoulder against a massive slab. They worked with a quiet, efficient synergy, their movements fueled by the shared energy coursing through them. They were no longer a collection of individuals, but a single entity with a unified purpose. The wall of fallen crystal was not an obstacle of fear, but their final collective task. As the last stone was rolled aside, revealing the open sky, they turned as one to face the Guardian. Its luminous form bowed to them, a gesture of deep respect. Then it raised an arm, pointing toward the shore they had left behind, where once there had been only the strange, misty sea. A new path now lay upon the water, a calm, shimmering ribbon of aquamarine light that cut a straight and clear course through the lingering pearlescent haze. It was a road home, offered as a gift. They had passed every test, not by conquering the land, but by understanding it. They had earned their departure, but the true journey was only just beginning, for they would have to carry the memory of this magic back into a world that had long forgotten how to dream. The moon chaser glided upon the path of light, as if cradled by the sea itself. The journey home was unlike any voyage they had ever known. The waters beneath them preternaturally calm, the winds perfectly gentle, as if the continent itself was ensuring their safe passage. The crew, once a collection of skeptical individuals, now moved with a quiet unity. They shared stories not of the sea, but of their lives, their voices low and earnest around the evening cookfire. They spoke of children they missed, of parents they held dear, of small dreams they had once set aside. The mockery that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by a profound and unbreakable camaraderie, forged in the heart of a living mountain. Elara sat among them, no longer an outsider, but their acknowledged guide. She carried no physical starstone in her pack, but a soft, steady light seemed to glow from within her, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. They looked to her now not as a dreamer, but as a true visionary, a person who had seen the impossible and chosen to protect it. On the third day, a soft sigh seemed to pass through the ship. The crew turned as one to look back. The shimmering path of aquamarine light dissolved into the sea behind them, and the vast, silver mists that had guarded the continent parted one final time. For a breathtaking moment, they saw the crystal peaks of Starstone gleaming under a foreign sun, a perfect, silent jewel in the distance. Then, as if drawn by an invisible tide, the mists closed again, and the lost continent vanished from sight, leaving only the empty, endless horizon in its place. A bittersweet longing settled in Alara's chest, a quiet ache for the beauty they were leaving behind. It was in that moment she knew what she must do. She retreated to a quiet corner of the deck, pulling out a blank journal and a charcoal pencil. She would not draw a map for others to follow. She would document their entire journey, every trial and revelation, as a testament not to a place, but to a power, the power of dreams pursued with selfless hearts. As her hand began to move across the page, the familiar coastline of their home drifted into view on the horizon. The sight of the humble, weathered docks and the known shapes of the hills should have brought relief, but a new tension tightened her shoulders. They were returning to the ordinary world, a place of practical concerns and hard realities, where their incredible story would sound like the tales of sun-addled sailors. The true test of their journey was about to begin, a challenge not of monsters or magic, but of faith, and of holding on to a light the world could not see. The familiar scent of salt and fish and wood smoke met them as the moon chaser eased against the weathered dock. A crowd had already gathered, their faces alight with an eager, hungry curiosity. The whispers began before the ropes were even secured, tales of the mad voyage and the legendary continent already twisting into promises of chests, overflowing with gems. All eyes were fixed on the captain as he stepped onto the creaking planks, the crowd pressing in, waiting for the story of a lifetime of riches won. He stood before them, a man who had been remade in a crucible of crystal and light, and he did not speak of gold. His voice, though tired, carried a new and unshakable gravity. "We found no treasure you can hold in your hand," he began, and a ripple of confusion passed through the villagers. We found wonder, we found a truth that changes a person, and we found our leader in Alara, who showed us a wealth that outshines any jewel. He gestured to her, and the crowd's gaze shifted, their expectation curdling into disbelief. Fools, a voice called out from the back, sharp with scorn. You sailed into myth and came back with empty hands and a tall tale. Another laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. The crew did not bristle or shout in return. They simply stood together, their silence a fortress. They exchanged quiet glances, a small, knowing smile passing between Rorick and Kale, and in that shared look was the entire memory of the singing shore and the breathing mountain. The ridicule of the crowd could not touch the profound peace they carried within. Alara met the skeptical stares not with argument, but with a gentle, unwavering smile. She felt no need to prove anything to them. Her certainty was a quiet, radiant fact, as solid as the ground beneath her feet. The crowd, unsettled by her calm and the crew's strange unity, slowly began to disperse, their muttered doubts fading into the evening air. The confrontation was over, but a deeper understanding had taken root. The crew discovered that their shared secret, this impossible memory they alone possessed, had bonded them more strongly than any division of spoils ever could. They were guardians of a beautiful truth. As the others moved toward the warm lights of the village, Elara felt a different pull, a quiet summons in her blood. She turned and walked away from the noise, back toward the lonely shore, drawn once more to the edge of the known world, to the place where the sea meets the sky and anything still feels possible. The sea wind whispered against the cliff face, carrying the same salt and mystery it had on the night she found the driftwood. Alara stood on the precipice, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, where the water met a sky dusted with 1,000 points of light. The frantic yearning that had once propelled her forward was gone, replaced by a deep and resonant stillness. From across the vast, dark expanse, she felt it, a faint, familiar hum that resonated not in her ears, but in the very center of her being. It was the quiet, dreaming heartbeat of Starstone, a gentle pulse of reassurance that the continent was safe, resting in its own timeless peace. The pull of the unknown still existed, a low thrum of possibility, but it no longer demanded a voyage. It was now a conversation between her spirit and the magic she had sworn to protect. This was the true transformation, the alchemy of her journey. Her personal quest had not ended with an empty hand. It had blossomed into a lifelong purpose. She was no longer an explorer seeking proof, but a guardian, a keeper of a secret too precious to be pinned to a map. She would speak of wonder, of the courage to follow a strange and beautiful calling, of the strength found in letting go. She would become a weaver of hope, using her story to remind others that magic exists not just in distant lands, but in the choices we make and the dreams we choose to honor. She would let the legend of Starstone live on, not as a place to be claimed, but as a timeless symbol that the greatest treasures are those we preserve for the world itself. As this vow solidified within her, a single, brilliant streak of light carved a path across the velvet darkness, a silent and perfect affirmation from the heart of the dreaming continent. The sea had carved new lines on Captain Finn's face, but his eyes held a light they never did before the voyage. His ship, the Moon Chaser, no longer carried cargo for coin, but a different kind of precious freight, young faces alight with the same restless hope that had once drawn Elara to his deck. He taught them how to read the stars not as distant points of light, but as a celestial road. He showed them how to listen to the shift of the wind and the color of the water, lessons in respecting the sea's immense power. The payment he received was modest, sometimes just a basket of bread or a hand-woven blanket, but the fulfillment was a wealth he had never known. In the taverns, he became known as Old Man Finn, the teller of wild tales, but the children knew him as the keeper of wonders. His stories were always the same, a carefully crafted telling of a voyage through silver mists to a shore that sang, a story from which he meticulously removed any hint of a chartable course or a recoverable treasure. He spoke instead of the cost of arrogance and the reward of humility before the vast unknown. Not every seasoned sailor appreciated his new path. One evening, a grizzled whaler named Torvin slammed his tankard down, his voice a low growl across the crowded room. You fill their heads with fairy stories, Finn. You used to be a man of substance. Now you are a nursemaid for daydreamers. The air in the tavern grew still. Finn felt the old urge to defend his honor with a clenched fist or a sharp retort, but the memory of the breathing mountain rose within him, a calm, immense presence. He looked at Torvin, not with anger, but with a profound pity for a man who saw the ocean only as something to be conquered and drained. I guide them to respect the dream, Torvin, Finn replied, his voice even and clear. That is a substance that does not rust or sink. I once believed as you do. Let me tell you about a sea that answers rudder and sail with a music that can humble any soul. He then shared his edited tale, focusing on the disorientation of the mist and the haunting beauty of the chiming coast, carefully omitting the path and the mountain. He spoke not of what he took, but of what the journey gave him, a peace that settled deep in the bones. Torvin listened, his skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging, quiet fascination. He did not apologize, but he bought Finn his next drink, a silent toast to a world wider than he had allowed himself to believe. This small victory was not for Finn's pride, but for the idea he championed. The young people who learned from him did not all become explorers, but they became better sailors, better fishers, better stewards of the vast blue wilderness. They approached the horizon with a curious reverence instead of a conquering greed, a subtle shift that began to rewoven the very fabric of their community's relationship with the sea. And sometimes, when the light was just right at sunset, Captain Finn would pause in his work, his hand resting on the ship's wheel, and look out toward the endless western horizon. A slow, knowing smile would spread across his face, a silent conversation with a secret he was honored to keep. The harbor's constant noise of hammers and shouting men became Rorick's new world. His hands, once used only for hauling rope, now learned the language of wood and tool. He became a carpenter, but his purpose was singular and strange to the other shipwrights. He was not building for speed or cargo capacity, but for sound. He worked in a small, cluttered shed by the water, a place filled with the scent of fresh sawdust and salt air, obsessed with a memory of a shore that chimed with every wave. His dream was to build a vessel that could sing. The first prototype was a disaster, its hull groaning like a wounded animal as it slid into the water. The second was worse, producing a high, irritating whine that sent seabirds scattering. His third attempt simply shuddered apart in a gentle swell. Fellow craftsmen shook their heads, calling his pursuit a foolish waste of good timber. The frustration was a physical weight on his shoulders, a ghost of the same doubt that had gripped him on the mountain. He was trying to replicate a magic that was not his to own, and with every failure, the perfect, ethereal music of the Crystal Coast seemed to drift further away. The breakthrough came not in a flash of inspiration, but in a moment of exhausted surrender. He sat on the dock one evening, watching the sunset paint the water in hues of orange and violet, and he let the memory of Starstone wash over him, not as a sound to be copied, but as a feeling. It was the feeling of profound gratitude for his rescue, the deep peace of the reawakened cavern, the quiet camaraderie of the crew. He realized the music was not a set of notes to be captured, but a spirit to be channeled. He was not a recorder, he was a composer. Returning to his shed with a new calm, he began his masterwork, the vessel he would call the Starstone Melody. He chose each plank not just for its strength, but for its grain, its resonance. He shaped the hull with an artist's care, carving subtle channels and hollows designed not to mimic, but to interpret the sea's own rhythms. He worked with his own peace as his guide, imbuing the very wood with the gratitude he felt for his second chance. When the finished boat finally met the water, it did not produce the exact chime of the lost shore. Instead, it created something new, a soft, harmonic melody that rose and fell with its motion, a peaceful, moving music that seemed to soothe the very waves around it. His song ships became legendary, sought after not by merchants or admirals, but by those who understood that a journey could be as important as the destination. Each vessel carried a whisper of the continent's magic, a gentle reminder that beauty could be found in the most unexpected places. And Rorick himself, the man once paralyzed by fear, would often take the Starstone Melody out at dusk, sailing silently where the sea and sky met, a quiet smile on his face as his ship sang its gentle, grateful song to the falling night. Years later, in a dusty corner of the village archive, a small hand brushed against a worn leather cover. The child, a girl named Lyra with wide, inquisitive eyes, pulled the heavy book from its shelf. Its pages were filled with breathtaking sketches, not of monsters or gold, but of trees that pulsed with soft light and mountains carved from frozen starlight. It was Elara's journal, a quiet testament to a journey the village had tried to set aside. Lyra would sit for hours, tracing the glowing lines with her finger, the drawings feeling less like fantasy and more like a memory from a world she had somehow always known. She began to fill her own slate with these visions, drawing creatures of living crystal and shores that sang. Her friends gathered around, captivated, and soon every child in the village was sketching their own interpretations of the glowing forest and the breathing mountain, their imaginations set ablaze by a beauty they had never been told was possible. This local renaissance of art and storytelling did not sit well with everyone. Some elders, their minds fixed on practical matters, shook their heads. They called the journal a work of fancy, a harmless distraction at best, and a misleading story at worst. They urged the children to focus on the tangible world of nets and fields. But the children saw a different kind of truth in the wonder Alara had documented. They did not argue with the elders. They simply continued to draw, their shared belief in the beautiful possibility, creating a silent, unbreakable bond between them. Elara, her hair now touched with silver, would sometimes appear at the small schoolhouse. She never spoke of maps or voyages. Instead, she told gentle, abstract stories about the courage it takes to listen to a quiet calling and the strength found in letting a beautiful secret simply be. She spoke of dreams as seeds that, when planted in a community, could grow into forests of hope. She guarded the continent's physical secret with her life, but she freely fed the children's imagination, understanding that this was how the magic would truly endure. The legend of Starstone was no longer a destination on a map. It had evolved into a living concept, a shared symbol of wonder that the children carried in their hearts. Their dreams at night became a little brighter, a little more vivid, as if the quiet heartbeat of that faraway land now pulsed in rhythm with their own, ensuring its legacy would never truly be lost. The old lighthouse stood silent on the windswept headland, its grand beam long since extinguished, but Alara saw a different kind of light within its stone walls. She transformed the abandoned tower into a small observatory, its dome a new eye turned toward the heavens. Here, she did not teach the cold mathematics of celestial navigation, but the warm art of reading the sky as a storybook. She gathered young stargazers on woven mats, pointing out the same constellations that had guided her driftwood map, and spoke of them not as distant balls of gas, but as ancient heroes, great beasts, and forgotten cities painted in light. Her observatory quickly became a sanctuary where the telescope and the tale were given equal reverence, a place where the precise orbit of a planet could inspire an epic poem about its journey. This harmonious blend of fact and fancy did not go unchallenged. One evening, a respected scholar from a distant city visited, a man named Rorick, whose life work was the meticulous cataloging of stellar phenomena. He listened for a while as Alara spoke of the moon's gentle pull on the ocean's spirit and the tales suggested by meteor showers, and his posture grew rigid with disapproval. After the children had departed, he confronted her, his voice crisp and analytical. "You are blurring essential lines," he stated. "You give them mythology when they need mechanics. You risk creating a generation that cannot tell the difference between measurable truth and pleasant fiction." Alara did not argue or defend. She simply smiled and invited him to look through the observatory's great telescope. She guided him to focus on a binary star system, two suns locked in a slow, gravitational dance across the void. She explained the precise physics of their orbit, the pull and counter-pull that kept them eternally bound. Then, without moving from the eyepiece, she began to speak. She wove a story of two royal siblings, separated by a great conflict, but forever connected by an unbreakable vow. Their luminous dance, a testament to loyalty across impossible distances. She then turned to Alaric and asked a simple question. Does knowing the exact math of their attraction make their story less true, or does it give the truth a deeper kind of meaning? Alaric was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting from the precise stars in the lens to the faces of the children who had hung on Alara's every word. He had spent a lifetime measuring the heavens, but he had forgotten to listen to their music. The rigid boundary he defended between fact and fiction seemed to soften and dissolve in the face of her wisdom. "You have not confused them," he conceded, his tone now one of respect. "You have given them both a compass and a canvas. I see that now." Alara's legacy was secured not in a mapped location or a physical artifact, but in the minds she nurtured. She proved that the most profound truths are often those felt in the soul, a resonance that cannot be contained by data alone. On clear nights, The stars above her observatory do seem to shine with a particular, grateful intensity, as if the cosmos itself approves of this gentle keeper of dreams. The anniversary of their return arrived under a sky of exceptional clarity. Alara, Captain Finn, Rorick, and the other crew members found themselves drawn, as if by an unspoken summons, to the quiet observatory on the headland. They did not speak of the date, for the memory was a living thing between them, but they gathered together to watch the stars, their shared silence a language of its own. Then it began. A rare celestial alignment unfolded above them, planets and distant suns sliding into a perfect geometric pattern that had not been seen for 1,000 years. As the final star clicked into its place, a warm, familiar pulse of energy washed over them, a gentle wave that had nothing to do with the night air. It was a greeting, a clear and unmistakable hello from the lost continent of Starstone, sent across the vast, dark ocean of space. In that singular moment, the old, powerful pull returned to each of their hearts. The yearning to feel the chiming shore beneath their feet, to stand once more in the breathing mountain, was an almost physical force. The temptation to build a new ship and chase that light was a shared, breathless thought. Their eyes met in the soft starlight, and in that unspoken glance, a decision was made. Not a single word was needed. They turned their faces back to the sky, their hearts full of a grateful silence. They understood, with a certainty that went to their bones, that some magic is not meant to be captured twice. Its true power is preserved not by possession, but by reverence, by allowing a perfect memory to remain exactly as it is. This quiet, collective choice was the final seal on their vow. They were not just people who had visited a legend, they were its eternal guardians, bound by a secret that needed no map or gemstone to prove its truth. As the celestial pattern slowly dissolved, the night sky returned to its peaceful, familiar state, but the warm echo of the continent's pulse remained within them, a permanent and comforting reminder of the dream they all protected. The original star chart, its lines still faintly aglow, felt heavy in Alara's hands. It was the artifact that had started everything, a tangible piece of magic she had guarded for years. One evening, a dream left her with more than just a memory. Upon waking, she found a small vial on her windowsill, filled with a liquid that seemed to hold captured starlight. The pull to use it was immediate and clear. She unrolled the ancient driftwood, and with a fine-tipped brush, began to trace over the old constellations not with ink, but with this radiant essence. She was not copying the chart, she was conversing with it, letting her hand be guided by the memory of the journey itself. The sharp point, representing the Siren's mists, softened into a gentle swirl of silver. The straight line for the mountain path became a series of ascending, interconnected spirals. The heart of the continent bloomed at the center, not as an X marking a spot, but as a radiant, open flower. When she was finished, the map was utterly transformed. It was no longer a guide to a place, but a portrait of a transformation, a beautiful and complex artwork that visualized the challenges faced, the trust forged, and the inner light discovered. It was a map of the soul. A deep conflict stirred within her then. The original chart was her most sacred relic, a secret thread connecting her to that impossible shore. To change it felt like a betrayal of her own past, yet keeping it locked away, a private treasure, felt like a betrayal of the very lesson Starstone had taught her. True magic was not for hoarding, but for sharing in a way that nurtured wonder without demanding proof. Her decision was a quiet sacrifice. She carefully framed the new, luminous artwork and carried it to the observatory's main hall. There, she hung it on a central wall for all to see, a silent dedication to every person who feels the quiet, persistent pull of a dream that lies just beyond the horizon. Visitors to the observatory now often find themselves pausing before it. They know nothing of its origins, yet they report feeling an unaccountable sense of calm and vast possibility when they study its flowing, radiant lines. They cannot explain the hope it stirs, this map that leads nowhere and everywhere at once. For the crew, it is a silent, sacred understanding. They know its true meaning, a constant reminder that the greatest continent any of them would ever discover was not made of crystal, but of courage, and that its shores live on within them. A traveling storyteller, drawn by whispers of a singing sea and a mountain of light, arrived in the harbor. He listened to the tavern tales and the children's songs, gathering the scattered threads of their adventure. With a poet's flourish, he wove these fragments into a new creation, a folktale he called The Weaver and the Starstone Sea. In his version, the hero was a humble weaver who used a magical loom to mend the torn fabric of the sky, earning a path to the crystal shore. The story was an immediate sensation, its rhythms perfect for telling around a campfire, its hero relatable to anyone who worked with their hands. It spread from port to port, carried by merchants and sailors, changing shape with every new tongue that spoke it. In one land, the Sirens became restless spirits of the deep. In another, the Starstones were depicted as literal gems that rained from the heavens. Some tellings focused on the peril, painting the continent as a labyrinth of illusions that challenge the greedy. Others fixated on the treasure, describing chests of glowing jewels for the taking. The truth that Alara and her crew had lived, a quiet story of offering and awakening, was now adorned with 1,000 different ornaments. The crew discussed this development one evening at the observatory. A younger sailor who had joined them after the voyage was agitated. "They are getting it all wrong," he insisted. "They speak of monsters we never saw and riches we never touched. Should we not tell them the real story?" Captain Finn shook his head, a slow, knowing smile on his weathered face. "The real story is safe with us," he said, "but that tale out there, it is no longer ours to command. It is a seed that has been scattered, and it is growing in the soil it found." Elara nodded in agreement, her gaze soft. The legend does not need a guardian of its facts, but a guardian of its spirit, she reflected. In every version, whether the weaver is a hero or a fool, the heart of it remains. It is always about a choice, about valuing something greater than oneself. That is the magic that multiplies. She understood that by trying to correct the countless variations, they would only diminish the legend's power. Their personal truth was a quiet, sacred flame, but the world needed 1,000 different lanterns to see by. The stakes of their journey had now expanded beyond the physical. Their experience had become a part of the world's cultural soul, a shared myth that inspired artists, comforted the weary, and sparked curiosity in the young. Its message was being carried further than any ship could ever sail, its magic made more potent by its endless reinvention. And sometimes, walking back from the market, Alara would hear a group of children skipping rope, their chant a simplified rhyming version of the weaver's tale. She would pause and listen, a profound sense of peace settling over her as their young voices, innocent of the true story, carried the beautiful, transformed echo of her greatest secret out into the sunlit air. The sea breeze through the observatory window carried a familiar scent, one of deep space and ancient stone. Alara sat in the quiet of the evening, her breathing slow and even, when a gentle pressure bloomed in her mind. It was not an intrusion, but a soft knock at the door of her consciousness, a presence she knew as well as her own heartbeat. The Starstone Guardian was with her again, not as a challenger, but as a friend sharing a cup of starlight. In her mind's eye, a vision unfolded with breathtaking clarity. She saw the crystal shores, but their music was richer now, a complex symphony woven from new dreams. The forest of whispers hummed with fresh stories, tales of courage and kindness from every corner of the world, each one a delicate, glowing leaf on the luminous trees. The mountain's heart pulsed with a stronger, steadier rhythm, its light radiating out in warm, nurturing waves. The continent was not just alive, it was thriving, more vibrant than she had ever seen it, a sanctuary for hope itself. The sheer beauty of it was a physical ache in her chest, a sharp and sudden loneliness for a home she had chosen to love from an impossible distance. The longing to walk those shores just one more time was a whisper of exquisite feeling. She did not push the emotion away. Instead, she gathered it, along with all the gratitude that filled her, and sent it back across that silent, psychic bridge. It was a message without words, a promise that her work continued, that she would remain its steadfast keeper in the world of the waking. The Guardian's presence swelled with a feeling of deep approval, and then, as softly as it had come, it faded. The connection did not break, but settled into a permanent, humming thread within her soul. Her choice had not been a closing door, but the key that unlocked this eternal, sacred guardianship. She opened her eyes to the dim observatory, the ghost of the crystal light still dancing in her vision, and felt a peace so profound it felt like the answer to every question she had ever asked. A quiet boy named Leo often lingered in the observatory long after the other children had gone home. He would stand before Alara's radiant star chart, his small hands clasped behind his back, his gaze tracing the swirling paths of light, as if deciphering a silent language only he could hear. One evening, as the last of the sunset faded from the sky, he finally found the courage to speak. His voice was a soft whisper in the vast, quiet room. "I want to draw the stars I see when I am sleeping," he confessed to Elara. "They make different patterns, and they tell stories I have not heard anywhere else." In that moment, Elara saw her own younger self reflected in his earnest eyes, that same restless curiosity that could not be satisfied by the world as it was presented. She knew this was not a passing fancy, but the first stirring of a true calling. She knelt down, meeting his gaze, and simply said, "Then you must show me." From that day forward, she became his mentor, sharing not just the names of constellations, but the art of listening to the quiet music of the night sky. This new mentorship, however, quickly met the hard wall of practicality. Leo's parents were fisher folk, their lives governed by the tangible rhythms of the tide and the weight of a full net. When they learned of his growing interest in dream constellations, their concern was deep and protective. "This is a path with no fish," his father said one evening, his voice heavy with worry as they stood on the dock. "The sea does not care for starlight dreams, only for strong hands and a focused mind. We do not want his heart broken by chasing something he can never hold." Alara understood their fear perfectly. She invited them to the observatory, not for a lecture, but for a conversation under the very stars they worried about. She did not speak of crystal shores or breathing mountains. Instead, she spoke of her own family and how her journey had once seemed the height of impracticality, a risk that promised only hardship. "That journey," she explained gently, "did not lead me to treasure I could spend. It led me to my purpose. It taught me that a life built on wonder is a life rich in ways that cannot be measured by a full net alone." "True happiness," she suggested, "often lies in following the unique song only you can hear." Leo's parents listened, their skepticism slowly softening as they saw the profound sincerity in Alara's calm presence and the bright, determined hope in their son's eyes. They recognized that her guidance was not about fostering delusion, but about nurturing a different kind of strength. Their agreement was reluctant, a fragile truce with the unknown, but it was an agreement nonetheless. They would not stand in the way of his stargazing. That small, hard-won permission was a victory far greater than any gem. It opened a path, not to a specific destination, but to the infinite possibility of a journey itself. That very night, Leo stood beside Elara on the headland, a small slate in his hand, and looked up at the sprawling tapestry of the cosmos. His gaze was no longer that of a wistful dreamer, but of a young cartographer setting out to map a new world. He was the next dreamer, and his journey, whatever form it would take, had just begun. Every year, on the eve of the autumn equinox, the old crew found their way back to the headland. They arrived as the last light faded from the sky, their steps slow and certain on the familiar path to the observatory. It was an unspoken pilgrimage, a tradition that needed no calendar. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of a shared stew, and the low, comfortable murmur of voices that had long since run out of things to prove. They were no longer just shipmates, but a family forged in the heart of a living mountain, and this night was the anchor of their year. They ate together, their laughter easy, and their silences even easier, the bond between them a tangible force in the quiet room. Later, they would stand before the great telescope, not to search for a specific point of light, but simply to remember the feeling of navigating by a sky that felt alive. The true purpose of the gathering, however, was always the same, a quiet reaffirmation of the silent vow they had all made under those crystal spires. As the years turned and their own children and grandchildren grew, a deep and complex tension would sometimes surface. Around the fire, with loved ones who knew only the public folktales, the urge to whisper the full, unadorned truth was a powerful temptation. To share the exact chill of the singing shore, the profound warmth of the breathing cavern, the very texture of that impossible reality, felt like a gift they were withholding. They longed to prove that their quiet wisdom was not just philosophy, but hard-won knowledge from a place more real than any map. Yet every time that urge arose, they would look across the circle and meet another's gaze, and the memory of their shared commitment would rise with it. The magic of the secret was not in its concealment, but in its shared weight, a treasure they carried collectively. To break that trust would be to diminish the very thing they had sworn to protect. So instead of a confession, they created a ritual. As the stars reached their zenith, they would raise their glasses in a unified, symbolic toast. To the dreams we keep and the light we share, they would say in quiet unison. The words were simple, a code to anyone else, but for them, it was a complete retelling of their entire journey, an honor paid to their promise without ever speaking its name. This unbroken circle, meeting year after year under a sky that always miraculously seemed to clear just for them, became a living monument. It was not built of stone, but of loyalty and a shared, profound respect for a beauty that asked only to be remembered. Their friendship was the true legacy of Starstone, a bond that proves some experiences are so powerful they can create a connection strong enough to last a lifetime. The final book felt light in Alara's hands, a slim volume that held the quiet weight of a lifetime. She had not written a chronicle of crystal shores or breathing mountains, but a gentle meditation on the sanctuaries we carry within. Its pages spoke of the small, quiet spaces where hope is nurtured, the personal shores where the music of possibility still chimes against the rocks of reality. It was a book not about a place, but about a state of heart, a guide to recognizing the fragments of Starstone that exist in a kind word, a moment of courage, or the simple act of looking at the stars with wonder. To the surprise of her publisher, the book did not remain a quiet philosophical text. It became a beloved classic, its poetic insight passing from hand to hand. Readers wrote to her of finding their own lost continents in community gardens, in the silence of libraries, in the rhythm of a daily walk. They spoke of a newfound ability to see the magic woven into the fabric of their ordinary lives, a shift in perspective that felt like a homecoming. This widespread resonance, however, sparked a quiet debate among scholars and critics. Some praised its powerful metaphors, analyzing its allegories of the human spirit. Others became detectives of a hidden truth, scrutinizing every elegant sentence for a clue, a hint of a real journey that could explain the profound certainty in her words. They wrote lengthy essays, arguing whether her work was pure philosophy or a carefully coded memoir. Elara received all such inquiries with the same gentle, enigmatic smile. She never confirmed or denied a single theory. She understood that to provide an answer would be to build a wall around the legend, to turn a living, breathing inspiration into a settled fact. The mystery was the fertile soil in which the magic grew. In the simple dedication at the book's beginning, she offered her final and most telling statement. She wrote, "For all who listen to the whispers of the world and dare to answer with a dream." It was an invitation, not a confession, extending the same sacred choice to every reader that the continent had once offered her. This book was the culmination of her life's work, the final vessel for the light she had sworn to protect. She had translated the continent's essence into a language every heart could understand, ensuring its legacy would ripple through generations long after her own journey was complete. Sitting in her observatory as evening fell, she closed her eyes and placed a hand over her heart. There was no longing, only a profound and steady warmth, the quiet, humming presence of Starstone's gratitude shining back at her from within, a permanent sanctuary she would carry always. The final winter settled around the observatory like a soft, white blanket. Alara's breath formed small clouds in the still air of her room, her body frail, but her spirit luminous with a lifetime of memories. One night, as a deep and gentle sleep took her, the boundary between dream and reality dissolved not into darkness, but into a familiar, chiming light. She stood once more on the shore of Starstone, her bare feet meeting the crystal sand, and with every step, the music of the continent rose to greet her like a chorus of old friends. The air hummed with the same profound peace, the trees glowed with their internal radiance, and the mountain stood serene against a sky woven from starlight. It was more vivid than any memory, more real than any waking moment she had known in decades. From the heart of that shimmering landscape, the Starstone Guardian emerged, its form woven from the very light of the place, its presence a warmth that enveloped her completely. Its voice, a resonance deep within her soul, offered not a challenge, but a gift. "You may remain here," it echoed. "Your spirit could walk these shores forever, a permanent part of the dream you have guarded so faithfully. The choice is yours alone." The temptation was immense, a pull as fundamental as gravity. To stay would be to live inside the most beautiful truth she had ever known, to never again feel the ache of longing or the slow march of time. She looked out at the perfect, eternal horizon, and then she looked inward at the long tapestry of her life. She saw the young woman with the driftwood map, the leader who had faced uncertainty with empathy, the teacher who had nurtured countless young dreamers, and the author whose words had built sanctuaries in hearts around the world. Her journey had been a full and complete story, its final chapter already written in the lives she had touched. To stay would be to cling to a single, perfect moment, but to let go would be to trust that the magic she had served was now strong enough to live without her. With a heart full of serene and certain love, she gave her answer. She would return. "My story is complete," she thought, her spirit speaking directly to the Guardian. This magic was never mine to keep, only to protect and pass onward. It must live in the dreams of others now. It is time for me to let go. The Guardian's form shimmered, not with sadness, but with a radiant, overwhelming approval. In that final act of selfless release, Elara felt the continent's ultimate gratitude, a wave of pure, boundless light that washed over her, not as a farewell, but as an eternal embrace. The crystal shore, the luminous trees, the very starlight itself, began to gently brighten, their forms dissolving into a soft, brilliant luminescence that held her, loved her, and acknowledged her choice. The dream did not end, it simply transformed, pouring its essence back into her spirit as she drifted toward waking. And as the first light of dawn touched the window of her quiet room, a final, peaceful breath escaped her lips, carrying with it the faint, grateful echo of a shore that would forever sing her name. Her hand rested gently on the cover of her old journal, a quiet smile gracing her lips as she slipped into a final, peaceful sleep. When the crew found her, the morning sun was just beginning to warm the stones of the observatory, and the silence in the room was not one of sorrow, but of a profound and gentle completion. They gathered, these old friends whose lives had been irrevocably woven together by a single shared secret, their hair silver and their steps slower, but the light in their eyes undimmed. They did not speak of loss, but of gratitude, sharing stories of the woman who had taught them that the greatest adventures are those that change you from the inside out. As evening fell, they stood together on the headland, looking up at a sky that seemed to have gathered every bit of its brilliance for this one night. The stars did not simply shine, they blazed with an intense, joyful clarity, a silent, radiant salute to a guardian who had kept her promise until the very end. The legend of the Lost Continent of Starstone was now untethered from any single person, living on as a timeless idea, a whispered reminder that real magic sparks to life in the choice to protect a beautiful mystery rather than to claim it. In the quiet of the observatory, a new generation of dreamers now looks through the great telescope, their hearts full of the same restless wonder that once called to a young woman on a distant shore. They gaze at the endless sea and the sprawling cosmos, forever asking what beautiful secrets might lie just beyond the edge of sight. Their curiosity, a living flame that ensures the gentle, humming light of Starstone will never, ever fade.